Hello, welcome back to the channel. It's me, Emmy the Cat Lady, and you join me here in this very shiny place, the Institute. So, the next part of our Immortality and Fallout series, we're talking about synths. We're talking about synthetic people, and as a potential way to, live forever. So, the synths of the Institute do give us something entirely different. So these are synthetic people that are made in a lab, and they're intelligent enough to have developed some degree of self-determination. They're indistinguishable from humans unless you kill them and find a synth component in the brain, but they can be reprogrammed with new memories and personalities. But the replicated man way back in Fallout 3 does highlight the issue with this AI and being so advanced, and that happens long before we get to this point where we can actually come here to the Commonwealth. So we talk about self-determination as not a malfunction, which is something that Harkness, who is the synth that you're looking for in the replicated man, he says that in his holotape recording before he gets his memory wiped and new memories put in place. So an interesting concept, and we know he's not the only one, because the Railroad have dedicated themselves to finding synths that have escaped and setting them free, giving them memory wipes and sending them out to places like the Capital Wasteland. And if you kind of follow the different factions, you actually discover that there are synths all over the place in Fallout 4. So this is obviously spoilers for this game, but I assume that, you wouldn't be here if you hadn't played through Fallout 4 at least once. But Mayor McDonough is a synth, Paladin Dance is a synth, Roger Warwick, although he's aware that he's a synth, Sturgis is a synth, sometimes the Brahmin over there in your settlement is a synth. They're everywhere. And if you visit Covenant, which is a little settlement near the water, where they're very much anti-synth, and they have a test, well, they have commandeered a specific test, which is the Vault-Tec GOAT exam, the Generalised Occupational Aptitude Test, to determine if someone is a synth or not, and they have a 50% success rate of calling it right, which is also known as random chance. So it's not exactly helpful in actually identifying who is a synth and who is not a synth. So, it's kind of questionable, and the only way people can catch on if someone's been replaced by a synth is if their behaviour changes, and that has made a lot of the residents of the Commonwealth really paranoid. Anybody that has a slight change of behaviour is suddenly accused of being a synth. You see that play out on your kind of second visit to the Diamond City Marketplace, where the guy's got a gun on his brother because he thinks his brother is a synth. If you can intervene safely, you can actually prove that he's not a synth. But this is the kind of state that people have got into, where any slight change in someone's behaviour or personality means they think they're a synth, and then it's causing strife between different communities. So there's currently no way to tell if someone is a synth or not. You're a scientist. There's a synth, yeah. So there's no definitive way to tell if someone's a synth or not without killing them, at least with what's available in terms of medical investigations, that kind of thing. We'll get into why that is the case later on. But you'd think that they might be able to actually see it on like a CT scan or an MRI scan, because the synth component's not small. It's substantial enough that you can find it after you've killed the person. So it's not microscopic, and you would think that it would potentially show up on a scan. So as an interesting kind of example from the real world, so most people that have dogs or cats will be familiar with the identification microchips that we implant into animals. So they can be implanted into dogs, cats, horses, pretty much any animal other than maybe fish, because giving fish injections is not an easy task, and I can say that from experience. But even my tortoise, Turtwig, is microchipped in the wrong leg, because he's a stubborn little bugger that wouldn't give me the right leg, but he is microchipped. My cat is microchipped. And a lot of pet owners will get this done because it gives them a way of being identified if they get lost or if they get injured on the road, stuff like that. As well as if you plan to travel with your animal. So under what used to be the pet travel scheme before Brexit, where we could take animals to Europe and back, they had to be microchipped and have rabies vaccinations and all that kind of stuff. So the thing about them is that the microchip is about the size of a grain of rice, or like a small capsule essentially. It kind of looks like a little medication capsule almost. And it's implanted generally in a specific location so that people who are scanning animals know where it should be. So for dogs and cats, that's kind of the back of the neck or sort of between the shoulder blades. For tortoises, it's usually in the front of the left back leg, so in the kind of quadriceps muscle area of their back leg on the left, although my tortoise, unfortunately, I could only get the right leg, so his is there, but it's good practice to scan them all over, but that is, there's specific locations that are generally the good practice so that everybody's doing it in the same place and everybody's scanning the same place to find the microchip that's there. And then it gives off a radio wave that gives you a big long number. It's kind of like a barcode, which then is connected to the animal's record on a database so that you can then find out, okay, this cat belongs to this person, here's their phone number, you can call them and say, we've got your cat at the vet's, do you want to come and get it, kind of thing. So that's kind of how those things work. But in some animals, and especially, I always found this with large breed dogs, when they're microchipped as puppies, sometimes the microchip can kind of migrate as they grow and it ends up down in front of the shoulder or somewhere else. And there are rare cases where the chip can stop working or where they can actually kind of fall out during implantation or just after implantation. And if you don't notice, then you wouldn't know. But there is enough metal in these little microchips that they'll show up. So if you take an x-ray of a dog that's microchipped, you'll see the chip, you can see it, you can see the metal. Metal always shows up as pure white on x-rays, so you would see it, and it would potentially show as a little kind of artifact in an MRI scan as well. So, these kinds of things would certainly highlight the presence of something that had metal in it or some kind of, component like the synth component. I think the difference is that in the Fallout universe, access to, diagnostic imaging seems to be pretty rare. Most of the machinery that's in the hospitals is broken down, it's rusting away, it's not been used, it's probably not working. It's unlikely that anybody out in the wasteland is going to have access to that kind of thing. The Institute probably do and can, but they don't want or need to know how to tell the difference between a human and a synth, so they're not going to share that technology with anybody, But if you see the early synths, like I think there's one up there, actually, there's some up here, so yeah, these are your kind of early Gen 1 synths. And they are very obviously robots. They look like robots, they talk like robots. They've kind of got, so like their power and everything's sitting where the chest would be, and they're obviously based on the human skeleton, but they're quite clearly robots. They look like robots. You're not going to get confused between them and a real person. The Gen 2s have a wee bit more meat on their bones, question mark. That's a bit of a weird way to put it, but also not inaccurate. So so this guy is a Gen 2, and you can see he's got eyes, he's got synthetic skin, but he looks like a mannequin. He doesn't look, human enough. He looks like one of the creepy mannequins that you see all over the place in this game, except that he can talk and respond to questions from people's questions about supplements and whatnot. So, they're very, very interesting. Here we go. So, the Gen 3 synths are the most advanced, and they are organic. They are made of synthetic bones, muscles, organs, blood and skin. And this isn't actually too unbelievable, because this technology is actually already in development in the real world. So there is methods for making synthetic meat for food, because we're struggling to have enough space to raise meat to feed all the people in the world. And there's also even the potential for actually growing organs for transplants for people, so that people aren't having to potentially wait months and months for a suitable donor organ, because they could just grow one in the lab. So that is something that's kind of in development. And the main difference is obviously the synth component within the brain that we've discussed already, that can only be discovered after death. They can breathe, they can eat. This guy's he's just kind of idly moving like a real person would. So there we go. And then they come out as fully formed adults. Hello. Yeah. So, they can eat food and fancy lad snack cakes apparently, which is hilarious. And then, they've got this framework. I'm guessing this is supposed to be like partly their kind of, just a framework for them to put all the bones on and things. And then they're dipped in this to make skin. And then they also come out with underwear on, which is convenient, because that keeps this from being a problem. And they do eat and digest, which we learned from that terminal, and Dr. Zimmer even mentions that when you speak to him in Fallout 3. So the genetic blueprint is based on Sean's DNA, so our son's DNA, which is apparently valuable because it hasn't been exposed to radiation, because he was frozen in the vault since the bombs fell. And it does kind of mean that your player character is essentially the grandparent of all the Gen 3 synths in some way. But DNA has been modified using FEV, so part of it does come from the biolab where they've been using FEV. That's why you do see Gen 3 synths of different races, different genders, different body types. But they can have their mind wiped and memories altered, even being used to replace a living human, which, questionable ethics and things, I would say. But it's an interesting one, and it does seem like the Institute does basically create a synthetic person, copy of a person they want to replace, and then send that particular synth to kill the person and then take their place. And if you've come across the art versus art random encounter where there's the two guys, one's a synth, one's the real art, and they're fighting, and you can kind of get involved in that. So one does wonder if it's possible that you could, kidnap the person first and use their DNA to make the synth version of them and then do away with them. Possible that is, but you can actually see there that there's organs. So see if we can watch this a bit closer. So this machine's basically stitching on artificial muscle. There's artificial intestines and things. So they have artificial blood, which means that's why you can't tell by taking like a blood sample, and there's no way of telling the difference whether it's a human or whether it's a synth. And they can act like normal people. They can mimic circadian rhythms, even though they don't technically need to sleep. But for when the Institute goes replacing people, the thing that often clues someone into the fact that this person's been replaced by a synth is that there's changes in behaviour, and that's how they're often kind of caught out. And the thing about it as well is that the Gen 3 synths are beginning to show, more autonomy, that they want to kind of make decisions, and that's why they're defecting and they're running away. So you can see that thing at the back is basically injecting synthetic organs. You've got lungs, intestines, there's I think that's the liver there I can see, and then stitching on all the muscles and stuff. So it's kind of gross and creepy, but kind of impressive as well. And it is the head of robotics is actually under investigation because the number of synths defecting has increased, and they're a bit concerned about that and about why that might be the case, which is interesting. So then this is the third stage over here, when the machine brings it over, where they kind of kickstart the body. Yeah, so they use electricity, I think, to kind of kickstart the body system. Yeah. Which, by the way, yeah, you see that? That's actually a really interesting detail that, they start the kind of breathing in the heart and then the muscles all went more red because there's blood circulation happening now in there. So yeah, that's a really interesting detail that I didn't really know happened. I'd never paid that much attention to this whole process before, but that's pretty cool. So yeah, once they get the heart started and the blood circulating and all the muscles pink up because the muscles have got blood supply now, and oxygen, because that's what happens when blood is exposed to oxygen, it becomes more red. Deoxygenated blood isn't blue like it is in the anatomy diagrams. It's red, but a darker red, which is why it does look blue through the skin, but when it's exposed to oxygen it becomes a brighter red. So there's an interesting little thing, and that happens with meat as well. So meat that's packaged in the supermarket looks nice and red, because they actually put oxygen in to the packaging. When it's like vacuum sealed, it's oxygen's pumped in, and that makes the meat look redder and makes it look better. So there's a little fact for you. So are the Gen 3 synths actually people? Can we call them people? Can we treat them as people? So there's a few definitions that I think we have to look at in order to kind of answer that question. So there's 3 factors that can ultimately define personhood and our identities as people, as humans. And that's sentience, sapience, and self-determination. So we're going to kind of look at them one by one. So sentience is the ability to experience feelings and sensations. So sentience does require a nervous system of some kind that has capacity for sensory input and behavioural responses as an output. So a clear and important example is nociception, which is the sensation of pain and lets you detect harmful stimuli and avoid it. This is the system that makes you pull your hand away if you put your hand on a hot stove top so that you don't get burnt. That's nociception. So quite an important sensation and thing, for survival. So even if we do make AI sentient, is it right to make a robot feel pain and distress? What's the benefit to making artificial intelligence suffer like that, other than just inflicting the human condition on it? I mean, sure, it's more realistic for synthetic people to have sentience, same as humans do, but where's the line between realism and cruelty? And it does bring up some ethical questions, which the whole topic of artificial intelligence is rife with. We do know that the Institute does this and uses the synths as test subjects, including things that cause them pain. So there's a conversation you can overhear between Dean Volker and a synth in the clinic, where the synth asks if there'll be pain, and the scientist basically says that's what you need to find out. So let's see. Here we go.
Reaction to the K14 compound. We'll start the next trial. The dosage will be much larger this time, and the side effects will likely be more pronounced.
Will there be any pain?
I honestly don't know. I suppose it's your job to find out. Now hold still.
Yeah, so, we can certainly question the ethics about that, and there's also a terminal entry, if I can find it. I'll need to figure out where that actually is. That's Eve. I'm pretty sure she is a synth, but yeah, so the interesting little note that you can find on this terminal here in the Binet quarters. So the synths also have a sense of taste, so they can taste food, and this little note can be found that apparently they all love the fancy lad snack cakes and nobody knows why. So it doesn't make any sense. I've run the diagnostics, quadruple checked the neural mappings, done comparative analysis of taste buds, tracked digestive patterns. Hell, I've even gone so far as to simply ask several of them, and still I'm no closer to answering the question, why do Gen 3 synths like to eat fancy lad snack cakes? I mean, sure, they have the capacity to experience taste. Every Gen 3 possesses the synthetic equivalent of the requisite receptor cells, but why this and why all of them? Good thing it's physically impossible for a Gen 3 to actually gain weight and succumb to obesity. So And that'd be quite the Achilles heel. Humanity's most impressive technological achievement laid low by junk food. So yeah, that's quite a funny little thing that they all love the fancy lad snack cakes apparently. Okay, so we're back here. So sapience is the ability to apply knowledge, experience and judgment to situations. So things like learned responsibilities. Hello.
Excuse me.
Yes, you are. Yeah, so sapience means using learned responses and behaviours. So if I say this, then that happens. So if I don't, that's the kind of thing. And it's also defined as wisdom. So, using insight, using ethics to make decisions about things, using your knowledge and previous experience to decide how to respond to a situation in front of you. That's what sapience is. And then finally, of course, there is self-determination. So this means making your own choices, taking control and responsibility for your own life, and being able to say, I want to do this, I want to achieve that, this is who I am. So these three things together are what separate us from animals. The majority of animals, birds and even some invertebrates definitely have sentience. They have some kind of nervous system. They're able to feel things, to have sensory input and respond to that sensory input. So most animals and living things do have sentience to some degree. There's some animals that have sapience. I'm talking about kind of crows and ravens. They are intelligent enough to have some degree of sapience. They do learn. They've developed the use of tools and things like that. So that kind of fits into that little category there. But self-determination is really the thing that makes us human. That we have the ability to say, no, this is who I am, this is what I believe in, this is what I want to do, is taking that responsibility for our own lives. And the Gen 3 Synths, we do see they do have the capacity for self-determination. If they didn't, they would never run away from the Institute. They would just stay here and accept their law, and they wouldn't want to leave or to go and do anything different. And the fact that there's an entire department in the Institute, we'll maybe head over there for this conversation. So yep, this is the Synth Retention Bureau. It's full of coursers and annoying people who don't shut up and just keep getting in the way. So this department is entirely focused on retrieving escaped Gen 3 Synths. So if the Gen 3 Synths didn't have self-determination, this place wouldn't exist. There'd be no need for it. You can actually see on the screens, that's the Crow cameras, the Watchers. That's the feed from that, and then they've got a map of the Commonwealth as well. But yeah, just the fact that this department exists, that they need to make the coursers to send after all these escaped synths, is proof enough that they have self-determination. And Harkness quite kind of rightly states self-determination is not a malfunction, and it does put them very close to being human. Interestingly, it's unclear whether they actually age. That's an interesting kind of question about them, if they age, if they kind of die of old age, or if their body kind of breaks down. It's very unclear. But can they get sick? Is that possible? Apparently they're resistant to disease but not always immune, according to some of the kind of logs and the details. They've got some informants, cricket. So yeah, you can find out they've got a lot of informants. Trashcan Carl is an informant. Doc Weathers. So basically all the caravans kind of spy on the Commonwealth for the Institute and things, which is interesting. But yeah, here's a list of people that have escaped. Last sighting at Boston Airport. But it does make you wonder, because obviously there's the synth child Sean, who you get given at the end of the game, whether you side with the Institute or if you choose not to side with the Institute, then he kind of appears and you have to decide whether you want to keep your fake child or not at the end of the game. But the notes about him on the research terminal suggest that he doesn't show any sign of aging. You know, so he's like a 10-year-old child that's going to stay a 10-year-old child for God knows how long. And while he's obviously very intelligent, the fact that it's not as good a replacement for the fact that your character lost their child, because they never got to experience their child growing up and be a parent, and then they get given this fake 10-year-old child that isn't ever going to grow up, so they're still going to miss out on, you know, the kind of coming of age milestones and things that a parent would want to experience for their child. You know, they're not going to go to university and graduate, they're not going to get married and have their own children, because he's not real, he's synthetic. And obviously that's a whole other issue, as well as whether synths are so sophisticated that they could actually breed. We don't seem to see that as being a thing. So, you know, interesting thing. And, you know, they're organic systems, they're organic bodies, which means that things could go wrong, because biology doesn't do hard, rigid rules that can never be broken. Biology likes to show variations in things. Biology likes to have exceptions to the rule, and sometimes exceptions to the exceptions to the rule. That's just the way biology works. Things don't always behave like you'd expect. But the Gen 3 synths are all based on Sean's DNA, and once you've kind of progressed a little bit and you attend the director's meeting, you find out that Sean has terminal cancer, which means that even with all this technology, all this research at their fingertips, he has cancer that can't be treated, because, you know, cancer's not that simple. People talk about a cure for cancer, developing a cure for cancer, but cancer's a class of disease. It's not one singular entity. There's so many different types of cancer, which means that there's probably never going to be one singular magic, this cures all cancers ever, and that's great. It's probably never going to happen like that. But, you know, even with all their technology and all their capabilities here, they still haven't been able to find a way to cure Sean's cancer, so he's dying. But does that mean that the synths, as they get older, could be at higher risk? Because we know that some cancers are genetic, or some people have a genetic predisposition to cancers in cases. So could that happen? Could they develop these things down the line and then get sick, die? Are they actually going to be immortal? And then if they do, I mean, one thing that's noted with the ones that the SRB does bring back is that sometimes when they try to reset their brain, it doesn't work, and it's caused damage to their synthetic brain, which means that they're basically for the scrap heap, because they can't recycle them, which is kind of an interesting thing. And we know that they have tried and do put, you know, personalities and create specific synth versions of specific people, like Roger Warwick at the Warwick Homestead, and a bunch of others as well. And then obviously Nick Valentine, well, he's a prototype that seems to fit somewhere between the Gen 2 and the Gen 3 synths, and he's got the brain scan of a detective from pre-war Nick Valentine, but Nick Valentine has become his own entity separate from the detective that was pre-war. He has his own opinions on things, he has feelings, and he's happy to express his opinions as well. He's got plenty of sass about him, but he has then kind of progressed into his own person, and someone that's kind of different from the original Nick Valentine based on his experiences and things like that. So, you know, kind of an interesting one. And then Curie as well, she's a really interesting case, because she was sort of specialised medical robot. So she was specialised for medical research, but she was a robot with a much more basic artificial intelligence. But because her original keeper treated her like a person, she developed a personality to a point where you can you know, she can express a desire to actually be, she can then express a desire to be a person, and you can transplant her personality into a synth and download her into a synth. Does that make her a person? Does that make her human? It's an interesting question. So, is becoming a synth a viable option for immortality? Go away, stop talking to me. So are the Gen 3 synths actually people, or are they just machines with delusions of humanity? What do you think? If you found out your body was dying, would you want to be replaced by a synth and have all your memories transplanted into one? Or is that idea too icky and too weird to think about? It's really quite an interesting question, and I think there's a real ethical and moral dilemma that centres around this question of identity and where the soul resides, where the essence of who you are as a person actually resides, and can you copy yourself? It's one that's really kind of a big theme in the game Soma. If you've played it, you'll know what I'm talking about. And that's a big question that's asked in Soma, and Soma is the Greek word for body. So somatic means of the body. That's part of, you know, it's a common term in medical terminology, as is a lot of Greek. If you study medicine, you learn bits of Greek whether you like it or not. So if you've not played Soma, it's highly recommended by me. It's a really, really good game. It's a bit of a horror experience, although if you're not a huge horror fan, you can turn on a kind of story-only mode where the sort of scares and the monsters and things aren't as much of a problem to you. But from a story point of view, I think Soma really, really captures this question in a big way and makes you think about these kinds of things. And I think to a degree the synths, it's the same thing, that, you know, you're replicating people, you're copying people and making clones of them, essentially synthetic clones of people. And you know, despite all the information that's available, if you go digging through all the terminals in this place, you still don't really find out much about the reason why the Institute are actually doing this. Like, what are they hoping to gain? Is it just an experiment? Do they just want to see how they integrate to society? What is the point? What are they trying to achieve with all this? I think it's a very interesting one because, you know, Sean does kind of declare that the Institute is the best hope for mankind. So if you destroy them, you're destroying that. Mr. House thought the same thing as well in Fallout New Vegas. So, you know, that is a question that you need to answer when you're playing through the game and decide for yourself. But I think it's really quite an interesting question, is that at what point can we kind of officially say that these synths are people, they're human or close enough to being human? I'd love to hear your opinions anyway in the comments. So this is a really, really interesting kind of question for me. It's something that I do think a lot about, and definitely if you've never played Soma, it's by Frictional. It's definitely worth your time. It's a really, really interesting story. But yes, let me know what you think in the comments, and I'll see you all next time. Bye.